Today is July 22nd, 2007. I am Jessica Clark. It is a pleasure to conduct this interview for the Dakota Memories Oral History Project. To start with, can you state your full name?
Marilyn, Jeanette, Sauer, Bauman.
And where were you born, Marilyn?
I was born at Java, South Dakota on the farm.
I am not familiar with that town. Where is that near?
Walworth County, close to Selby. Selby's the county seat, I believe. And no big towns right around there.
Okay. And when were you born?
When? September 30th, 1932.
Have you ever heard a story about your birth?
No, I haven't.
Okay. Do you know if a midwife or a doctor was present?
A doctor.
A doctor?
In fact, I know his name, Dr. Jones, who came to the house. Yeah, yes, I do know a little about it.
Okay.
I know he came to the house to deliver all us kids at the time, and we were born right there in the house.
You said all the kids. How many are in your family?
4.
Can you share one of your earliest childhood memories with us?
Oh dear, that's hard. I remember getting a doll for Christmas one time, and my little sister broke it immediately. That left its mark. I still have the doll. We glued her back together, and she's in the case over there.
How old were you?
I must have been, let's see, I must have been 8, because she was a little less than 2, and she's 6 years younger than I am.
Did you have a lot of toys when you were growing up?
No, we basically didn't have much. And I'd have doll clothes. My grandmothers would sew for me and make things, and my father built me a little cupboard when I was about 6 years old, and he made it out of apple boxes, and that was neat. And one of my aunts gave me a china tea set at one time. So those are some memories.
How many girls were in your family?
2 girls and 2 boys.
Can you take me from the oldest to the youngest and tell me their names?
Okay, there was Raymond Dale, who was born January 11th, 1931. And then I was born in 32. My younger brother was born December 1st, 1933. And then in 1938, Velma Jane was born, May 16th, 1938.
What was your younger brother's name?
Donald William.
Were any of you named after any relatives or family members?
No.
Can you tell me, you were really close in age to your older brother Raymond. Can you tell me a little bit about what he was like when you were growing up?
He was a quiet, just a quiet person. He still is. And we'd play together. I played more with my younger brother than I did with Raymond. He was, I don't know, didn't run around and play with us that much. But my little brother was my pal.
What was his personality?
He was fun. He was mischievous. He was very sweet.
And then your sister, what was her name? Velma, what was she like?
Uh, she was so much younger than I that we didn't have a lot in common. She was a boisterous little thing.
When you think back to your childhood, how would you best describe yourself as a kid?
Boy, that's hard. That's hard. I think I was fun-loving and hard-working. We all had our chores, things we had to do. I started milking cows when I was 6 or 7, and by the time I was 8, I would have to get up at 6 in the morning and help with cows, help milk cows before we went to school.
Did you guys have a dairy farm, or was it just for the family?
We'd milk about 8 cows a day. I mean, that's about how many milking cows we'd have. And we'd have to take care of the chickens and sometimes ducks if we had them. And herding sheep was one of our least favorite things because they don't smell very good. And but we usually had sheep and pigs. And then, of course, cattle.
So with the sheep, what would the sheep be for?
Their wool.
Did you guys shave and do your
We
hair?
sheared them, yes. I never did. And when there were a lot of sheep, they'd usually have a sheep shearer come in and do it. My grandmother actually sheared sheep sometimes. She would come and help us.
About how many sheep did you have on the farm?
40, 50 maybe, something like that. And a couple of dozen pigs, or when the babies were born, of course, there were a lot more.
And what would the pigs be used for?
For selling and for making sausage and stuff like that. We'd process them ourselves. My dad was the local butcher. He wasn't really the local butcher, but that's where the relatives would all come out there and buy a pig. He'd process it for them and make the sausage, and they'd take it home. So.
Did you ever help with the sausage making
process?
Yes.
Oh yes, I like that.
Can you tell us how you made sausage back then?
Well, we ground up the meat, and my dad would mix it. He was the best sausage mixer in the area. He had a good recipe, and then we'd stuff the sausage with the sausage stuffer and so on and so forth. I helped cut meat. I never wanted to be around when they killed those animals, though. I didn't want any part of that. But I liked that part, the sausage making.
How long would it usually take them to make sausage up?
A whole day. And then it would have to go in the smokehouse and be smoked. And the hams.
Did you have a smokehouse on the farm?
Mm-hmm. It was a little shed. Had wires hanging in it, and they'd build the smoke pot in the middle and hang the sausages on the wires and leave them there for a few days. It was usually done in the wintertime.
You mentioned that you had chickens. How did they raise chickens, and how many did they have?
Oh, I don't know. We'd have maybe 50 chickens, something like that, and then you'd get a bunch of baby chicks in the spring, and then when they were big enough, you'd butcher them and can them for soup. And we'd usually process my grandmother's and one of my aunts who lived in town. She had no children, but she came out and helped raise us, and that's a part of my childhood that I really enjoyed, having Aunt Katie there.
Is she your mother's sister or your father's?
My father's sister.
And what was her last name?
Sockman. She was Katie Sauer, and then she married Reinhold Sockman.
When you think back, how would you best describe her?
Kind, sweet, quiet, and hardworking. That's the best description for her. Very sweet person.
When she would come out to the house and help around the house, what type of things would she help with?
With everything from laundry and cooking, and she'd especially always come out when they had a threshing crew or other people there working, and she'd come out and help cook. But basically she'd come out and help my mother with us kids because there was a lot of work.
How far did she live from the farm?
She lived in Java. That was 6 miles.
And how would she get out to the farm?
Her husband would bring her. She didn't drive. Women didn't drive in those days.
Did you guys have a car on your farm?
Oh, yes.
Do you remember what type of car it was?
No. I just remember we were playing by the car one time when my cousin was hiding in the car, and when she saw me coming, she kicked open the door and broke my front tooth off. I shouldn't be telling these things, should I?
What happened if you had a tooth knocked out? What would...
It wasn't completely knocked off. I lived until last year with half a tooth there.
So did they have dentists back then?
Mm-hmm.
And did you ever go see one when you were growing up?
The only time you'd ever go to a dentist was if you had a toothache. And then it was time to pull it because it just, nobody did anything, you know. That's what the dentist was for. They didn't fill teeth. Not the ones around our place.
Did you ever have a tooth pulled?
Mm-hmm.
Was that pretty painful back then?
No, not so bad. Was probably ready to come out anyway.
What about brushing your teeth? Is that something that you did when you were growing up?
No. I didn't own a toothbrush until I was like 12. And I think that's pretty common back in those days. That was a long time ago, you know, that's 60 some years ago. So I think I was close to high school before I got a toothbrush.
Why did you get your first toothbrush?
I don't know. My mother must have heard something that we should be brushing our teeth, that there was this invention and we should do this.
How about baths? How often would you take a bath when you were growing up?
Once a week, whether you needed it or not.
And
unless we fell in the mud.
Did you do that often?
Well, sometimes, of course. It was muddy out there. And then we'd go wash our feet in the tank or in a bucket outside or whatever if it was summer.
And how would you take a bath when you were growing up?
In a galvanized wash tub until we got fancy and got a tub built into the bathroom. And got a bathroom, actually.
Where was the bathroom before you had one in the house?
About 20 or 30 steps that way. Yes. And that was a scary thing to go out there at night.
How about in the wintertime? Was it hard to get out there?
Mm-hmm. Right. But in the wintertime, you had a bucket. Things were different then.
When you took a bath, how would you heat the water?
On the stove, on the cook stove, which was fueled by a stack of wood or cow chips that we had to go out to the pasture and gather in. That would make the hottest fire the quickest. You know what cow chips are.
I do, but why don't you go ahead and tell us?
Dried cow manure. My little brother and I would go out to the pasture and we'd take a wagon and we'd go load up the dry cow chips. And if they weren't dry enough, we'd flip them over so that when we came back, we could get them the next day.
Okay, I have 2 questions for you. The first one is you said that you would go out and pick them up, and if it wasn't dry, you'd turn them over and let them dry out. Did you use your bare hands to pick them up?
Sure.
Really? And
Or a stick,
okay.
if they weren't dry enough. I mean...
And when you burned them, did they create an odor in the house at all?
Oh, no, no.
Just had to ask.
No, you didn't smell them. I mean, we'd have a big tub of them sitting beside the kitchen stove, and if you needed the oven hot now to bake bread or to whatever, throw in a few cow chips and it really heated it up. But there was no problem picking them up and tossing them in there.
Let's see here. Well, speaking of baking bread, who was responsible for the cooking in your house?
My mother.
Did you help your mother with it?
I did. She taught me how to do a lot of things.
Did any of the boys help with the inside chores?
Oh, no, no. That was women's work.
And how often would you bake bread?
Whenever you needed it.
Was it usually an all-day process like butchering or?
No, no. It's just something you did every couple of days to bake a batch of bread. Or bake something else, which would go on almost every day of some kind. My mother would make sweet dough and bake kuchen.
Sweet dough, what was sweet dough?
Sweet dough is basically like bread dough, except it has more butter and more sugar in it. It was sweetened.
You mentioned that you were about 6 years older than your sister.
Mm-hmm.
Did you have to do a lot of, did you have to help raise her and take care of her? Since she
Oh
was so
yeah,
much
we had
older?
to watch her so she wouldn't get into trouble and so on, but that wasn't a problem.
What was it like having a new baby in the house?
I don't remember. I don't remember.
We talked a little bit about, the dentist and stuff. What about going to the doctor? Was that something that you...
No, you'd go when you were sick, which generally they had their own home remedies to take care of things.
Did you ever get sick when you were growing up?
Yes, I developed hives, and they took me to a doctor several times before they finally figured it out.
How did they take care of that? Do you remember?
You just have to. The doctor gave us calamine lotion to put on him to stop the itching, but that really didn't help until he thought that I must be allergic to eggs or something and to quit eating eggs, and then we figured it out. It was every time I'd get into the strawberry patch. So to this day I can't eat strawberries.
So did you have a large strawberry patch when you were growing up?
Yes.
Can you describe the garden that you had as a kid?
It was very large. It was probably the size of our city lots. And they'd go in there with the plow, at first with the horses and the plow, or later on they'd drop the fence and drive the tractor in after they went to a tractor. But that was plowed up, and then everybody'd have to go in there and rake, and we'd have a really big... The potato patch wasn't in with the rest of the garden, though. they raised the potatoes out in the grain field. Just tossed the potatoes in out there. And potato harvesting was a big job. We'd have to haul them in and put them in the root cellar for the winter. But my mother she raised all kinds of vegetables. The sweet corn patch also was out in the field. So the garden itself, the size of it was vegetables. A big pumpkin patch, a large cucumber patch, of course, because we had to make lots of dill pickles. A big patch of dill. And then, of course, all the other garden variety of vegetables. And my mother always had beautiful flower gardens. She loved flowers. Had lots of hollyhocks. Lots of other things. Lilacs.
You mentioned that you did a lot of canning when you were growing up. Did you help with that?
Mm-hmm. Yes, I did.
Can you tell us a little bit about what you would do and when you would, like what time of year you would do the canning and what it was like?
Well, you would do the canning when that particular vegetable or fruit was ready. We'd can corn when you'd harvest corn, the sweet corn. We'd cut it off the cobs and pack it and can it. We'd make dill pickles, lots and lots, shelves full that were in the root cellar. And, of course, beans and peas and just all kinds of vegetables. And then we had apple trees, and so the apples and the cherries and whatever other fruit we had, we would can. Some of the apples were crab apples, and we'd put them in the jars whole because they were about this big, and we'd stuff those in the jars. Those were really good, and can those. And then, of course, came peach and pear canning time when the boxes of fruit arrived, and apricots. We'd always can a few crates of those till the root cellar was full.
What about making sauerkraut? Was that something that your family did?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
How would you make that?
Cut up the cabbage and put it in the thing and salt it in a really big crock. You know what a crock is? Stoneware. They're about this big around. That's about the size that we used. They'd hold 10 gallons. And you'd put the cabbage in there and put the salt on, and they had a wooden lid that fit right inside the crock, and they'd weight it down with a stone. We'd always have to scrub those stones in the wooden cover. And every couple of days you'd have to stir it until it started really fermenting, and pretty soon it was sauerkraut.
And how would you serve sauerkraut when you were growing up?
With everything. We ate a lot of sauerkraut. Actually, my mother used to make sauerkraut with knipfle. Make knipfle and then add sauerkraut and serve it together. And with sausage. And the knipfle and sauerkraut we'd serve with speck, which is unsmoked bacon. They'd cut that up and put it in with the sauerkraut and cook it.
What other types of dishes did your mom make often when you were growing up?
Pigs in the blankets. And there they would pickle in another crock. They would take cabbage that isn't cut up and core it and put it in the crocks with whatever, vinegar and salt or whatever, and let the heads be in there. And then when you'd want to make pigs in the blankets, you'd go get a head of cabbage and take it apart, and it was already sour like sauerkraut, and then use that for pigs in the blankets, or halupzi, as they called it. And that was rice, a little bit of onion, and the bacon or salt pork or hamburger. Later on, they used to use hamburger rather than the salt pork, because all of a sudden they thought that all that fat wasn't good for you.
So when you were growing up, did your dad butcher cows for meat?
Mm-hmm.
So you did? Do you have
Not
any
cows, but steers.
steers?
Yeah, the young ones.
So you did have beef.
We had beef, yes. We had beef.
How would you keep the beef cool in the summertime?
You didn't. You canned it. But they didn't butcher in the summertime. That was done in the fall. And then it was hung in the root cellar for a while, and mostly canned. And later on we got a big freezer when those became popular, after I was about grown up. Then they would freeze everything. But mostly canned it.
You talked about making dill pickles. Something I've heard about and tasted was pickled watermelon.
Mm-hmm.
Did you make that when you were growing up?
Yes.
And how would you make that?
Same as you do pickles. But you didn't let it sit and ferment. You just stuffed it into the jar and added the salt and the vinegar. And I don't think we did that very often. We didn't usually have any.
What about Sunday meals? Were those a special meal? Was something saved for Sundays?
Yes. Usually you'd make a big meal because there was always company. You'd always have somebody stopping by, some of the relatives, after church. And as I got older, then my grandmother married and lived in town. And I remember we used to go to her house on Sundays after church. And she would always have chicken soup every Sunday. She'd have chicken noodle soup. And she'd use canned chicken that she canned herself. She lived in the town, but they had a chicken yard there. And so she'd have chicken. We'd have chicken noodle soup and homemade bread.
What about desserts when you were growing up? What were some of the desserts that you guys had?
Homemade ice cream in the wintertime. And my mother was the best cake baker in the county, I'm sure. So we had cake and pies, of course. Pies made out of whatever you had. In the spring it was rhubarb, and in summer it was apple pie, and in the fall pumpkin pie. So
You said your mom was a great cake maker. What was one of her best cakes?
chocolate cake. That was my dad's favorite.
When you think back to your childhood, what was your favorite dish that your mom prepared?
Oh dear, that's a hard question. Everything she made was good. I loved, now this my grandmother made, and then my mother did too, and what are they called? Kolaches or something like that? It is prune turnovers. It was made with a sweet dough, almost like a pie dough, and take the circles of the dough and put a tablespoon of filling on, which was prunes cooked with cinnamon and sugar, and then fold it over and bake it. So they were like a half-moon shaped tart. They were very good. pumpkin or prune. That was probably one of my favorites. Probably still is, if I can find them.
And how about your least favorite? Something you really didn't like seeing on the dinner table?
Liver.
Would that make it on the dinner table often?
No, because my mother knew how much everybody hated it, but when you butchered, you had the liver too, and they needed to do something with. But my mother tried to doctor it up and make liver gravy and served it over mashed potatoes. It didn't help.
Liver gravy, that's a new one I haven't
Well,
heard.
she'd fry the liver with onions and then make gravy and put it on that and then serve that, the cut up liver on the top of the... I still can't like it.
So during the butcher process, did you guys ever make liver sausage?
Oh, yeah.
Did you like that?
Yes.
How about blood sausage? Was that something that they ever made?
Only Grandma made that, and only Grandma ate it. Well, I guess my dad ate some too. I couldn't.
So this grandma that you're talking about, is this your dad's mom?
Mm-hmm.
What was her name?
Her name was Louise. Actually, Louisa, but they just called her Louisie.
And what was her maiden name?
Fiechner.
And were you close to her when you were growing
Yes, yes. I lived with her during school years sometimes, and when the weather was bad. When I was in high school, though. But she spent an awful lot of time out at our place.
up? So I'm guessing that she lived in Java?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
When you think back to her, what type of a grandmother was she?
Sweet and quiet. She was very small and very kind.
Can you share some of your memories of visiting with her or living with her? What were some of the things you would do?
I'd just help her with some of the housework, and she was so quiet. She just liked just doing her work. She was a very quiet, reserved person.
Did you ever know your grandfather?
No. He died when I was 1. He died in 1933.
How did he die?
I don't think anybody really knew. They had a name for it, but I think what it was diabetes, and they had a name for it. They called it Wassersucht. I still don't know what that means. That he filled up with fluid and died from that. Maybe that's congestive heart failure. I don't know. There was no diagnosis, and in those days. And that was before I was born, so I don't really know.
Did your grandmother remarry?
Yes.
How old were you when she remarried?
Well, she remarried within a year, because this guy that she married also lost his wife about the same time. Within the same year, I believe. And he came courting because he couldn't, he needed a wife, right?
And what was his name?
Adolf Stangl, Stangl.
Did you, when you were growing up, was he like a grandfather to
Mm-hmm.
you?
He was Grandpa. He was Grandpa.
And how would you describe him?
He was very nice, was very kind, and loved us kids. He really did. He was born in Austria. He's not a German. So he came over from Austria.
Your grandmother, did she come over from Russia?
Yes.
Do you know about when she came over?
No, I don't. I've got it someplace. The information is here somewhere.
Did she settle down in the Java area?
Right. Her family came. It was a large family.
So was your dad born down?
My dad was born on the farm that I was born on. And he died on that farm.
What's your dad's name?
William. Everybody called him Bill.
When you think back, how would you describe your father?
Quiet, fun-loving. He was a tease. He was just lots of fun to be around. And I loved going out in the field with him or helping him with chores or doing whatever. I hated housework, and I'd ask to go with my dad instead.
When you'd go out in the field with him, what type of work would he have you do?
Well, whatever we went out there to do, if I could go along, I would go. But that would be like stacking hay or shocking grain or whatever we were doing out there, husking corn, picking corn, different things. I'd help him in the barn and help him feed the pigs and so on, and herd the sheep.
So your grandmother and your father, did they speak any English?
My grandmother didn't. She learned in her older years. She learned to speak some, but it was broken. She never was comfortable with it.
How about your father?
My father they were English speaking, but they spoke a lot of German though too.
In your home, did you guys speak German or English primarily?
We kids spoke English and they spoke German to us most of the time, but we would understand it and sometimes speak it, but they'd speak German to us a lot until the later years.
When the kids, you mentioned that one of your brothers was mischievous. When the kids would step out of line, how would your father discipline you?
He'd give us dirty looks. He might threaten us, but he was harmless. I don't ever remember I remember him threatening me with a razor strap one time, but we must have been such angels we didn't need any disciplining. I don't know. My mother would just slap us on the arm or the shoulder or something if we were getting out of line. But
How about affection? How would your father show affection to the children?
he'd just be nice to you. There was never any hugging or anything like that. They didn't demonstrate physically, but you could see in their eyes. You'd know.
When you think back to your parents as a couple, did they work well together?
Yes. Yeah.
How would you describe their marriage?
Well, it must have been happy. They stuck to each other for a long time. My mother's still alive, but my father's been gone for 10 years. But my mother is 100 years old. Well, not quite. She'll be 100 on August 15th.
Oh my goodness.
Yes.
And what is your mother's name?
Matilda. Everybody calls her Tilly.
And what's her maiden name?
Rosine. Rosin.
And when you think back to your childhood, how would you describe your mother?
Hardworking, a good mother. She was just hardworking. She was always busy. But she was always nice.
Were you close to her when you were growing up?
I guess so. Yeah, I think I was closer to my dad, but my mother and I were fine.
Her parents, did you know them?
Oh, yes.
And what were their names?
Uh, Wilhelm and Dorothea Rosine. And Dorothea's maiden name was Stecker, Stoecker.
And where did they live?
They lived on a farm by Selby and then retired into Selby.
When you think back, what type of grandparents were they?
Very quiet, very nice.
Did you get to visit them often?
Not as often as I did my other grandparents, but we'd visit them once in a while.
What type of things would you do when you visited them?
Beats me. I don't remember. They lived in a sod house on the farm. And I remember one time when I stayed at their house for a few days, and my cousin Joyce came to play, and we would sit in those big sod house windows, which were, like this deep. The window ledge was just huge. And we'd actually sit in those ledges where the sun was coming in and play there. And we'd run around out in her farmyard, which was fun, play there.
What type of activities did you do for fun when you were a kid?
Well, we'd just run around and play. We'd play hopscotch. We'd play ball.
Is that baseball?
Softball.
So did you have a glove and a ball and a bat, or?
We had a ball and a bat, not gloves. Not for a softball. You had to toughen up and do these things. And I was a pretty good ball player.
Did you play a position?
No.
Positions or just kind of?
No, you just took your turns, and somebody was out there in the field catching, and we all had to do everything, take turns doing it.
So when you were playing, what type of clothes were you wearing?
The same thing we always did, dresses. But when I got him up into high school, then slacks started becoming popular. And I remember owning some pedal pushers, which were called pedal pushers. They came to the knee, and I was so proud of those.
So your clothes, were they homemade or were they store-bought?
A lot of homemade things. And then when I got him into high school, we had store-bought clothes, I suppose. Although I made a lot of my own clothes. I started sewing my own clothes when I was about 8.
Who taught you how to sew?
Me. My Aunt Katie helped me. Maybe we'd, if I want a skirt or whatever, then my dad would take me along to town to buy the flour. And the flour came in pretty sacks at that time, and you could pick out your print. And if I wanted to make a whole dress, then we'd have to buy 2 of them of the same kind, But I remember making clothes out of flour sacks.
So they were like printed with
Just printed cotton. We made curtains with them. We made our clothes. We made tablecloths, whatever,
So did you have a sewing machine or was it all by hand?
Sewing machine. An old pedal or treadle. It had a big iron treadle on the bottom, you know, and you put your feet on it and do this. So neat. It's still there on the farm.
So is the farm still in the family?
Yeah, but it's not livable anymore. The farm is, but not the house. The house is starting to, I mean, not starting to, it's not livable, let's put it that way.
When you did get to buy some clothes, where would you buy clothes from?
You have to go all the way to Mobridge if you were going to go to a store, but we just ordered out of Sears catalog or Montgomery Ward's, and then you'd have to wait for it to get there.
So did you have to like subscribe to Sears, Roebuck, or Montgomery Ward's, or did they send you catalogs?
They just sent everybody catalogs.
And how often did they usually send out these catalogs?
You'd get a winter catalog and a spring catalog. And then there would be a Christmas catalog. And in later years, I guess they started sending sale catalogs too. But mostly it was just the spring and summer and the fall and winter catalog.
Would you ever order anything besides clothing out of the catalogs?
I don't remember. I don't think we did. I think basically just clothing. Have to order the overalls for the guys.
And how many pair of overalls did the guys usually have at one time?
Probably two. One to wear and one to wash.
How often would you guys do laundry?
Once a week. Sometimes more often, but usually once a week.
Can you tell us how you did laundry back then?
Well, to begin with, you had to haul the water in from the well and put it in a large wash tub, which was oval shaped, like this, and about this high, this wide, that long. It would cover two burners, one on a stove if you had a stove that had burners, and we did later, when I got bigger, we had a gas stove. And that would fit on two burners. And we'd have to carry the water in pails and put it in that. And we had a washing machine that had a motor on it that you'd have to start the gas motor to run it. That would run the agitator, but the wringer, you still crank the wringer. Or wring them by hand.
And how would you dry the clothes?
On the clothesline. In the wintertime, you'd even put them out on the clothesline and then bring them in and dry them, and they would dry faster if you let them freeze first. Get some of the ice off.
How about ironing?
We ironed. When I was younger, we used an iron that you heated on the big wood stove or cook stove. There was a handle, and then there were these, you've probably seen the iron plates, the bottoms, and you'd hook the handle onto it. You'd leave it until it's hot, and then iron until that one was cold, but you always had one or two in reserve there, and you'd switch back and forth. As they got cold, you'd go get a hot one. It was a lot of hard work.
Would you do the laundry and the ironing on the same day, or would they be different days?
Probably the ironing would be done the next day because it would take a day to dry the clothes. And if it was not possible to dry them outside, you had the folding laundry racks that you'd set up in the house and hang the clothes on there until they were dry.
we talked a little bit about food, but we never really talked about meal time. Would you guys sit around one table and have a dinner together?
Yes. We always, we didn't start eating until everybody was sitting. Except my mother, of course, who would stay up and have to serve some of the stuff.
Was that every meal, breakfast, dinner, and supper?
Mm-hmm.
Could people sit anywhere they wanted, or were there like you had?
No,
your
we
own
had
spot?
our spot. We had our spot.
And was mealtime a quiet time, or was it a time to converse?
Quiet, for the most part.
Did the children have to ask to be excused?
Yes. We didn't put it in that way. We'd ask. Yeah, I mean, I'm done, can I go? But usually we just sat there until everybody was done.
Was the mealtime started by a prayer?
Oh, yes.
Do you remember what prayer you said?
Well, when we were little, it was Appa lieber Vater, Amen. That was the small children's prayer, and then after that it was Segne Vater diese Speise uns zum Heilen dir zum Preise. Or Komm Herr Jesus, sei unser Gast, segne uns, was du uns beschert hast. So we'd say one of those.